Okay, so as we stated previously, we want to handle our sessions in an object-oriented way. We want to have a session object that we can use in our application. So we're going to have a go at an initial attempt at creating a session class in this one. We're going to take a bit of inspiration from Symfony, and we're just going to have a look at the session interface which is used there. Choose high definition for the best viewing experience, and if you'd like to join a growing group of software developers and take your skills to a new level, all you need to do is subscribe, click the little notification icon, and welcome. We're not going to get into anything as complex as what Symfony uses. This has a lot of different working parts, and it's way more complex for what we need to do in what is actually a learning exercise in our application. But we just want to have a look at it, take a bit of inspiration, see which kind of methods might be useful to us. So let's just have a little scroll through this and we'll see what might be useful to us. So I'm seeing that we have a start method, so that will be to start the session. Get ID for retrieving the session ID, so these are all good features that we can use. Set the session ID, which is something that you can actually do. You don't have to just use the default. Get name, get the session name, set a session name, invalidate. Do we need to do that? We'll maybe come back to that one. Possibly. Migrate also, we'll come back to that one. Force the session to be saved and closed, maybe. Okay, these are more interesting to us. Has to check if the session has a particular key in there. For example, if you're storing an auth ID, you might want to say, does the session have an auth ID? And then you'd know if we have an authenticated user or not. Get, again, retrieve keys from the session storage. Set keys to the session storage. All, retrieve all keys from session storage. Replace. That's like an array replace thing where you can replace certain key values with newer ones if you want to refresh your session. So these are all good stuff. Remove, there'll be times when you want to remove keys from the session. Clear is started, that's a good one. Check if a session is started, and if it isn't, you can start one. And so these are some of the more complex things which I mentioned about. Symfony gets into using session bags, which is like separate classes for actually handling the storage. Again, we're not going to get into that in this one. Maybe later in the course we might decide we want to do something a bit more complex. It's unlikely though. So let's actually go back over to our project and we'll start to see if we can actually start creating this but using a test. So that might provide that might pose challenges, but let's give it a go. So here I am in the BTB project, and as you can see we've already got PHP unit installed as a dev requirement. So first things first, I'm actually going to create a PHPUnit.xml file. If you remember in the first part of the course, when we had the PHP unit section, we created our own PHP unit sort of config file called a PHP unit XML file. Going to do the same again here, and there's going to be some specific configuration that we want, just so that we don't run into errors, and also it'll do a bit of formatting for us. So let's create that file now, and it's just phpunit.xml, and you put this in the root of the project, and then PHP unit will actually read this file when it's running the tests. I've already had a go at this, and so we've got some default to paste in here. We're going to create a tests directory. We've given it a test suite name of tests. Here is our config, so I'll talk you through these. Colors equals true means we'll get some colored output, so we'll see like green colors for success, red colors for failure. Bootstrap, so this is our vendor auto load file. That is what you use for the bootstrap file. Cache result, I don't know if you recall from the first course, it was creating like a little file for us, which we don't actually need, so I've just set that to cache result equals false, and then it won't create those cache files for us. And this one is necessary because if we don't include this while we're actually starting sessions in our tests, etc., PHP unit will actually send headers to the terminal before any of the session stuff takes place, which means we'll get errors. So by having this key value here, standard error equals true. That means that we won't see those errors. So that's our PHPUnit XML file. Just recreate yours exactly the same as mine and you shouldn't run into any errors. Okay, so now we need to create that test folder, and inside that test folder we'll create our first test file. So directory is tests, and then we're going to call this session test. Yep, that sounds pretty good. Session test. Okay, and this will extend PHPUnit test case. So extends test case, and so this is the one you're looking for, PHPUnit / framework / test case. Okay, and we'll use a fully qualified name. Okay, we need to create our first test. We'll start with something very simple. We'll just say we can check if a session is started. Okay, so at test. Okay, before we actually test if a session is started, let's just test that PHPUnit is working. We can do that with a quick assertion. So this assert true. So we're asserting that true is true, so we should get a green test. Okay, vendor bin PHPUnit, and it's in tests, and then session test. We'll run that. One test, one assertion, all green. Okay, great stuff. Now what we're going to do is create a session class, and we're going to have a property on that session class which lets you know if the session is started, and we're just going to work our way backwards like that. So this is going to be like a bit of a test-driven approach. Sometimes I take a bit of a hybrid approach. Some of it's test-driven, sometimes I write a bit of the code before I write the test, but typically I will write the tests before I write the code. So in fact, we'll just do one simple assertion. Assert session is not started. Okay. Can check if a session is started. Okay, great. Now then, we need to create the session class. So over in BTB project, let's go to source, and inside of source we're going to create a folder called session. And inside of there, we'll also create a class called session. Okay, we'll check the namespace. So it's given it a namespace of app session, and then all we need to do is have a private boolean is started equals false. Just need a method which returns us the value of this property. So public function is started, and then we are returning this is started. Okay, and we'll let it know that this should be a boolean, and so now we should be able to try our first test. So we'll create a session equals new session, and it's in app session. That's the one we want. By default the session isn't started, so this assert false session is started. Okay, and let's go and run this. So over to the terminal, run the same command as the last one. One test, one assertion. Great stuff. For this next test, we're going to actually start a session, but what we don't want to do is have sessions which are started and hanging over from test to test. So the way that we can start with the same setup before each test is to use the setup method. Okay, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to check if a session is the session status is started, and if a session is started, we're just going to destroy it. I think that should be okay for us for now. We may need to add a couple of other steps into it as our tests become more complex, but we should be able to get away with just doing that for now. So if session status equals triple equals, Now we'll go and have a look and see if we can find anything in the documentation which lets us know what the session statuses are. Okay, and so it gives us some here. PHP session disabled, PHP session none if sessions are enabled but none exists, and PHP session active if sessions are enabled and one exists. So that's what we want. Double click on that, copy, and we'll go over and just paste that in there. And then what we want to do is just destroy the session. So session destroy. Okay, and let's go over and see what the actual value of this PHP session active is. And so it is the number 2. So we could have put the number 2 if you actually knew what that was. But what is better is to actually, rather than putting like random numbers where another developer might read this and think, what does number 2 mean? It is better to use the constant names, and then it's so easy just to read this and know exactly what's happening. If the session status is PHP session active, then destroy the session. So always make your code as readable as possible and as understandable as possible. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like YouTube to show you more of my content, all you need to do is subscribe and click the little notification icon. I release new recordings every few days. Details of my schedule can be found on the community tab of my YouTube channel homepage.